Hi everyone, so we're going to be looking at how we could use the tests, but then only test for specific tests. So we're only running one test maybe out of 5 tests because maybe we only want to check to see if one test works and we don't want to have to see if all of the other tests work or not. So let's start a brand new project. I'm going to go to my terminal, new terminal, and I'm going to have to install. So let me go to my desktop, cd desktop. So here on my desktop, I'm just going to make a new directory and I'm going to just call it targeting tests. And then here I have my folder now set up. I'm going to drag and drop it over. And right over here, I'm just going to expand it. And I'm going to then open up another terminal. And I'm going to have to install Jest. So I'll do npm install -- save - dev jest. Okay, so now what I'll do is, now that it's installed, if I go to my package.json, you can see I have package.json, package lock, and node modules installed. So what I'll do now is I'll set up my test folder here at the root. So test, and that should be 2 underscores. So let me just delete it. So what I'm going to do, new folder, __ test, __. And I'm also going to make another folder and I'll call it JavaScript. And what I'm going to do here is in the package.json, I'm going to then set up the scripts area. So right over here in the package.json, I'm going to add the scripts. So I'll do comma scripts. And I'll add the test. And what I'm testing for is I'm testing for Jest. So I'll save that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add some files here in my test. I'm going to add the calculation.test.js. And then I'm also going to add this other file. It's going to be the calculation.js in my JavaScript file, in my JavaScript folder. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to code out the problem. Let's say in the calculation.js, I'll have some sort of function, I'm going to have a function, I'm going to call it calculation. And what I'm going to do is under the function, I have some module.exports is equal to calculation. So I'm just going to return this, whatever's done in the function, back to the test. Alright, so here in my function, I'm going to just set up some parameter values, so operation, value 1 and value 2. And I'll say var total is equal to 0. And if operation is equal to addition, total is equal to value 1 plus value 2. And then I'll check if operation is equal to subtraction. And I'll say total is equal to value 1. And this is subtraction, so I'll say value 1 minus value 2. And I'll also add else here at the end, and I'll say total is equal to -1. So this is just in case none of the other options match. And I'm going to return total. So hopefully I get some sort of response back to my test. And in my test here, I'm going to set up the test file, and I'll say const calculation is equal to require. And here I'm going to navigate to the folder, and I'm going to navigate to JavaScript and then the file calculation. And I'm going to organize some of the code here for the test. So I'll put describe check certain calculations. And what I'll do here is I'm going to set up a few different tests. So I'll say test. I'm going to test for addition check. And I expect something to happen here. So I'm going to call calculation. And what I'm going to pass over is addition, because I want to let the function know that this is going to be a calculation problem. And then I'm going to pass the values of 1 and 2 over. And then when whatever is returned back, it should dot to be 3. So if we add 1 and 2 together, then we should get back the value of 3. So let me run this test, npm test. Okay, so it says failed module. Oh, I spelled module incorrectly. Let me go to calculation here. Module. So now that we have module spelled properly now, let's save it. And then I'll run the test again. Alright, so we could see here the addition check, 1 is passed, so we know it works. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to go to my package.json so I could see a little bit more of what's going on here in the tests. So I'll go package.json and I'll type in -- coverage. So this is just going to show a little chart to see what lines of code are being used or which one's not being used. So let me run the test again. So you could see here that it shows what file is being tested, and we just have the calculation.js file, but it shows some sort of statements here. So it says 62.5% of statements are only used. And then branch, 25%, functions, okay, we only have one function. So the most important thing here is the 62.5. So if we go over here, this part, let's check the calculation.js. You can see here uncovered lines. So lines that are not being used at all are lines 6 all the way until line 9. So this code here, because we're only testing for addition right now, none of this other code here is being used. This is why we have this uncovered line number. So if we go back to our test here, and I will just copy the test inside the describe, and this will be subtraction. So let's now test for subtraction here, and I'm going to put subtraction, and I will just have the values of 10 and 2, and then that should be 8, so 10 minus 2 is 8. So let me run this test again. And you can see here now 87.5% of the statements are being used. So we have more of the code being used because we have subtraction and addition now. If we go back here, you can see here uncovered lines. So line 9, this line is not being used at all. So that's why we see the uncovered line right there. And if I go back to the test.js, and let's say I have another test here, and I'll have multiplication check, and multiplication. And if I just put random numbers here, 2 and 2, and 2 times 2 should be 4. But when this gets moved over or gets used in the code, so multiplication 2 and 2, if we go to our JavaScript file here, there is no values of multiplication. So when it goes through this if and else ifs check, then it's just going to be the else that will be returned back. So technically what's going to be returned is the -1. And if I go back to the test, I put 4 in the test. So in my test here, I put 4. And if I run it right now, so it says failed because it did not pass the test. It did not give us back 4. And if we look here, it expected 4 because we put 4 here to be, but we received -1 because the else statement returns -1. So I'm just going to change this back to -1 here. And let's run the test one more time here. So let's go here, and you can see 100% of the statements are now being used. So that's good now that we know that it's working, but I'm just going to comment this last test out because I do like to see when some of the lines are not being used at all. It just kind of shows what is being used, what's not being used, but there's a better way of going about doing this. So let's say I only want to test to see if one of the values work or one of the calculations work, and I don't care about whether or not the other test passes. I could actually use this word called only. So let's say for subtraction that I only want this test to run, but I do not want this other test to run. So I want to only test this, so I just have to type in dot only. So what's going to happen is it's going to look, when you run this code, it will look through this entire describe of test, but it will check to see if one of the tests have a only, then it's only going to run this test. It will skip this test completely, and it'll only test that one. So if I save it, and then I run it now, so you can see right here that it says 1 passed, 1 skipped, and 1 passed. So we know that it skipped the other test, and it's only trying to pass this other test. The only reason you want to do this is maybe you have multiple tests that you need to pass, but you don't want to deal with like 50 different tests that are failing at once. So you will just want to problem solve for one test at a time. In order to do that, you just put the dot only, and then that will make sure that it only tests for this. And then you can always delete it when you want to test for everything again, or you could just go one by one at a time. So then you make sure that you are only checking for one test at a time to make sure it passes. And right over here, when it talks about the percent branch, this percent branch, so what it essentially means is the percentage branch is, I'll put a comment right here. A branch is basically where the runtime can choose where it can take one path or another. So because we only have one test, there's really only a 50-50% chance for going through one path or the other. So since we're only testing for half of it, then we're only going to have 50%. So it's just a way of testing which way that the test can run. And statements are just actual lines of statements in the JavaScript file, line by line. The function is how many functions there are in the file. Here, there's only one function that makes up this JavaScript file. And then lines, just how many lines of code. And then uncovered lines is any lines that are being skipped in the code.